Hello and welcome to the Get In Real podcast. I'm Paul Walzati. Today, Howard Chung is just behind in production, and so you just got me, but we have two fabulous guests, Alan and Alicia of Green Ocean Real Estate Services. Today, we are talking about property management, all things property management, specifically really for if you're an investor looking to own rentals, looking to buy rentals, or you already own property as landlord. We're going to pick your guys' brain about several things today. So welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, we've been working together serving Island County, Skagit County, and then now we are moving into Workman County, which is fabulous. Excited about that. And I want to ask you guys just first off, how is the rental market? How would you describe, somebody walks up to you and says, how's the rental market? How would you describe that?
I would say, and Alicia can weigh in on her properties, I would say it's extremely tight still. But just like real estate sales, we do have a seasonality component to it. So during the holidays, during the fall and the winter months, things do tend to slow down. We see fewer rentals becoming available and even fewer tenants looking to purchase or looking to rent. It's short supply. We need more rentals. People are still transitioning here through the Navy into Whidbey Island Naval Base. And I've got a couple of tenants that are doing job relocations from the East Coast. So they're doing their search 2-3 months ahead of time and trying to secure a home to live in. So it's tight, but it's very solid.
I'm glad you brought up the seasonal cycles of things because, you know, here in the Pacific Northwest, the winter is much slower. There's parts of the country, Arizona, some of the South, Southern California, where maybe the winter stays pretty busy. But definitely here, it's really... The summer, would you say, is 2/3 of the cycle of when people are making that change?
Yeah, I would say summer is definitely our busier time. Naturally, come the winter and the holiday season is where we see that dip and things start to slow down.
Going into 2025, Alan brought up supply and demand. Obviously, we have a housing affordability issue everywhere in the Pacific Northwest. What's your forecast as far as rental prices? Do you see them? And I know there's different segments. There's apartments, there's luxury homes, there's all of the things. But in general, are rental prices up? Are they flat? Are they down? And then in those different segments.
You know, the predominant type of rental we have is a single family detached home. Those prices continue to rise. We're seeing prices for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house anywhere from $2,900 to $3,200 per month. Of course, the smaller the square footage, the lower the price is. But, you know, predominantly people want to live in a home. They want that fenced backyard. They want to have a place for kids and pets to play. And since there's fewer of those available, it drives the price up. So we're right around that $3,000 per month range for a single family detached.
Just all around. You have rental prices and home prices both going up. And we have, I guess, the exact same problem in both cases. We have a lack of new construction single family homes, which makes single family homes in higher demand and prices keep going up. So when people think about a property management company, one of the things that we've been trying to do differently is we're obviously a boutique company and a high level of service, premium service company. But still in general, people think property management, they think tenants being pissed off at managers and landlords doing a poor job and, you know, a lower caliber of service. And what are some of the misconceptions that go on with a property management company?
One of the biggest misconceptions is that, you know, we're truly agents to the owners of the home or rental property. And from that perspective, we understand that most owners have two principal drivers as to why they purchased residential real estate. The first is passive income, and then the second is growth and appreciation of that property. That said, you know, our goal is to keep tenants in there for the long term, or as long as owners would like to occupy the space as a rental. And we've got to keep good relationships with our tenants because we want them to be happy. We want them to care for the home. We want them to renew the lease. And a happy tenant will absorb a rent increase on an annual basis of a modest amount before they'll decide to move out, thus leaving us with a vacancy. So The key driver for the owner is we understand we're helping you build wealth through real estate. We're protecting your asset by recommending needed repairs, maybe some deferred maintenance, even suggesting capital improvements when they become due. And we do work for you, the owner, but we're also there to help the tenants make sure that they have a comfortable home to live in and stay there.
Yeah, and that does seem to be a little bit of the tricky part, right? Is you absolutely want to have happy renters, but your first obligation is truly representing the landlord. And so the art of that can be difficult. I mean, Alicia, do you have any kind of thoughts on that when you're working with tenants versus landlords? What's the art in handling all that? I mean, Alan spoke to it a little bit. I mean, it just really boils down to if you have a happy tenant, everything's going to work better. So you're still definitely focused on them too, but what's the balance there for you?
I would say that's absolutely right what Alan was saying. As much as we are agents for the landlord, the tenants are important, and we've got to make sure that we're keeping good communication and we're handling all procedures properly to make sure that we're keeping them happy as well.
Well, and Alan, you talked about the maintenance of the home, and we're also trying to make sure that we're doing a good job of staying with everything in code and safe. And talk about we do lease onlys too, and so maybe if either one of you guys could explain how a lease only works, and then when somebody does want to save some money, they want to self manage it, but they just want help with the paperwork and everything. What are some of the really important tips that you have for them on how to handle that, what to think about with the house and everything like that when they're about to rent it?
I would say definitely pricing. We can see some houses priced way too high, and that will, of course, leave the home vacant for a long time. People are not really interested in a home when it's clearly priced too high. And then screening tenants as well. I would say screening tenants there's definitely an art to screening tenants. You've got to know the right questions to ask. And going with the property management company, you have that third party who is dedicated to making sure that we're placing the proper tenants in your home.
And I would add to that, we're bound by certain tenets of the Landlord-Tenant Act. For example, we're obligated to lease to the first qualified applicant that comes forth. And we can state our qualifications requirements and make those available to tenants. We can terminate a lease if there's a violation of those qualifications and they don't disclose something that's later discovered. We also have to be very careful with the questions we ask during our application process. For example, we cannot require a tenant to provide their social security number. We cannot disqualify a tenant based on certain background information that we can obtain. So it's a very much of a slippery slope. And the RCW here in Washington, mandates what direction we can go with screening applicants.
As a landlord who's managed my own properties before, there is also something to what you guys are talking about. Even though we are happy to help people, and you guys are happy to help people with these lease onlys, of course, having that person in between you and the tenant, man, it can make a world of a difference, because you get into these spots sometimes where a renter gets behind or something else is going on, and a lot of landlords want to be very empathetic, and as as in many cases you want to be, but you get in a bad situation with the tenant, and it can get really stressful. It can become a huge financial burden for the landlord if you have a tenant who's not paying or refuses to move or whatever the case may be. And man, just also having somebody in between in that situation to help bridge that gap, that's definitely important. But still, let's say that they're still moving forward. They're managing it themselves. Let's just touch on a couple. What are a couple things that I know we have a contractor that goes through and will do an inspection, at least a visual inspection. But when you're going out to these properties that people are renting, what do you see the most often that's missed when they're preparing their home that they need to be aware of when they're renting a property?
Well, I can speak to my properties. The one thing that's most often mixed is operating and a proper number of smoke and CO detectors that are in each home. We're mandated by, again, RCW and the Department of Licensing to make sure that, we provide adequate protection, not only to the home, but to the tenants as well. So the one thing I see most often missed is that. The second most often mixed is just overall condition. That will drive the rental value of the home, but we can't have a tenant, move in where, the hot water tank doesn't produce adequate supply of hot water, where the furnace is old and not functioning properly, and the same with the appliances. So we catch that mostly on our initial inspections and walkthroughs, but then we've got to monitor it throughout the tenancy to make sure that everything continues to operate well.
What are some not very well known aspects of the Landlord-Tenant Act that an investor, a landlord should be aware of?
I would say like the notice periods for sure. They're usually, it's really hard to interpret these laws, and that is a huge one that can really get you into some hot water, is not properly notifying your tenants.
And that you're talking about all sorts of notifications, just like even if you want to go inside the house, kind of notifications.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
Well, it becomes even trickier when you're doing renewal notices with a potential rent increase. The state of Washington out of Olympia has mandated certain, timelines necessary for notices. For example, we have to provide a 60-day notice of a rent increase to the tenant. But other communities are adopting an entirely different timeline. Whatcom County, for example, has a 120-day notice required to the tenant before the rent can be raised. There was some discussion in years past, too, of capping the maximum amount or percentage of rent increase at 10%, but that hasn't passed. But we're still bound to a 60-day notice in some municipalities, 120 in others. So we've got to be very careful. And from a landlord's perspective, communication to that landlord is extremely important. For example, if I have to provide a 60-day notice of a rent increase to the tenant, I'm letting the landlord know at least 75 to 90 days before that timeline starts. And I've got to get them to respond to me quickly to let me know if A, they want to lease renew, B, if they want to, reclaim ownership of the property for their own personal use, C, if they do want to pass on a rent increase. I've got to follow those timelines. And it can get a little bit stressful at times when the landlords aren't communicating back to us what their intention is.
I want to just put a little plug in, for Green Ocean Real Estate Services. And let's talk about, for if somebody is looking to hire you guys, what are some things that we do a little bit differently than most property management companies?
A big one is approaching our rentals the same way that we would approach a home for sale.
This is like music to my ears, because that was kind of one of the things I was hoping you were going to say, is that, our property management company, it should be no secret that it's born out of, we're John L. Scott Real Estate as a company. This is Green Ocean Real Estate Services is an affiliate property management company, but we're kind of both. And that where that stems from is then we do want to provide that same level of service that you would if you were listing a home for sale when you're renting it. And I love, Alicia, that you do go and do the Instagram reels and have fun with it on social media, and that we're getting professional photography every time. I'm shocked at that in today's world, with how important photography is, how bad some of the pictures are that people use, and that can really leave some money on the table, or really just do a massive disservice to that home.
A couple of other things we do that most property managers don't do as well as we do is we do twice a year inspections. We do one full interior inspection, which is basically just making sure that the tenant is caring for the home in a manner that would, that the owner would appreciate, but also checking the condition of the appliances, the flooring, the smoke and CO detectors. And then the second inspection we do every year is the exterior inspection. And that's more important to the owner of the property, because we look at the siding and the paint and the eaves and the roof and the downspouts. And we want to make sure that we're protecting the owner's investment in that property. So we do 2 inspections per year. Another thing we do that other another thing we don't do that other PMs do is we don't charge for turnarounds or work order management. We don't charge for remodels and renovations when we assign the contractors out. We just make sure that the work's done in appropriate manner, but we don't have any upcharges for that.
No fluffy junk fees is what you're saying.
Exactly.
I like it. I like it. And one more thing on the managing of the properties and the maintenance of the properties. One thing that I think that a lot of landlords forget about or don't think about is they get really caught up on the cosmetics, that they want to, the carpets are stained, that kind of thing. And of course we want clean carpets and we want fresh paint and all that. But ultimately, like, how are we protecting the envelope of this property? So in walking Skagit Island County, it's like we have mice and rats. We have lots of ways that water can intrude into your property, and then you have leaks and you can have mold and you can have all these things. And then the decks can become unsafe from rotted wood. And so, helping them maintain their property in the envelope of the building can also just save them money long term, because good maintenance could mean that a deck or siding lasts much longer. Even a roof can last much longer. So some of these things aren't even necessarily expenses in the long term because they're protective.
Exactly. We can get the maximum life out of siding, roofs, windows, the appliances, but ultimately things are going to have to be improved. And if a landlord recognizes that they have to do an exterior siding project or paint or roof, we can help them coordinate that work. We can obtain multiple bids if they choose. And then we can make sure that the work is done professionally and complete. A lot of our landlords don't live in this area, so we're their eyes on their property. So it's important that we stay vigilant and keep an eye on it.
All right. And then one final thing. So Alan, you definitely work residential, but you have a specialty in HOA, commercial. Alicia, you're more specialty in residential. What would be each one of yours favorite? I didn't write this down as a question, so you're not prepared at all. But what is your favorite aspect of the property management business? Your favorite activity in the business?
I really enjoy showing the homes, getting to meet each and every tenant or prospective tenant, and showing them the features of the home, getting to know their stories and their background and why they're interested in renting and where they're going in the long run and all that good stuff.
My favorite activity is what we call the turnaround. So when a tenant vacates a home and we've got to go in there and get it ready for the next tenants, I like to look at the condition of the home and make recommendations to the owner as to, repairs or improvements they should make to A, boost the rental value of the home, and B, make sure that we get tenants that appreciate the home that has gone through a recent renovation or improvement. That could be flooring, it could be interior paint, it could be a new appliance package, it could be bathroom, toilets, sinks, faucets. So what I like is it's similar to going into a home and doing that first walkthrough when you're representing a seller and advising them on maybe some repairs or improvements they should make to wrest more value out of that home on sale. And the same is true when it's being put up for lease.
Well, I'm going to add to what you guys both said and say that, when people are thinking about getting into real estate, whether they're thinking about becoming a realtor or a property manager, one of the most cliche things, of course, to say is that I love people and I love houses. But I think you do need to love people and love houses. I think that you should, and that is true. But with both of you, I also wanted to note that what I appreciate about both of you is that both of you have a lot of pride in what you're doing and the company that we're building and the people that you're serving and that you're contributing to. You're not just clocking in and kind of doing a 9-to-5 thing. You're really trying to do a fabulous job and improve upon the lives of the people that you're serving. So good job to both of you. Kudos to both of you. Appreciate working with you both. And for everybody who was listening or watching, thank you for listening and watching, you guys.
Thank you. Appreciate it.